Now, there are increasing tensions between China and Taiwan, and they're reaching fever pitch, I've got to say. And that means there are increasing tensions between China and the civilised world. Just last weekend, 77 Chinese military aircraft breached Taiwan's air defence identification zone. And there were further 52 aircraft, I should say, including nuclear-capable bombers, doing the same on Monday. Now, it's been a particularly visible show of force by the Chinese. And, of course, the Chinese Communist propaganda outfit, that's the Global Times, have made a very pointed remarks as well. They've reported that China will fight to the death against Taiwan's allies. In an editorial which included Chinese willingness to go to war with the West over Taiwan, it stated, and I quote, "Their fate is bound to be a catastrophe when they attempt to separate Taiwan from China. There is no force in the world whose will to defend Taiwan is stronger than China's will to fight against secession and achieve reunification." The Global Times went on, "China dares to have a life and death fight against any force that hinders our reunification, but no force dares or is willing to fight to the death against the world's second largest economy, as well as a nuclear power, in order to prevent China's reunification." Well, they certainly sound like fighting words. And former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott, he's actually in Taiwan to deliver a keynote speech where he also met with the Taiwanese president this week. And Abbott referred to Taiwan as a country in that meeting, which I have to say is at odds with Australia's official One China diplomatic protocol. But he said he hoped his visit would help the international community to embrace the democratic island nation. He was quoted in the media as saying, "It is in large measure to try to help to end this isolation from which Taiwan has been suffering for so many decades that I'm here in this country, and I do hope that this will be the first of many visits." Now, many military experts have actually predicted that the China-Taiwan situation could escalate into a hot war sometime very soon. These include some of our most knowledgeable in this space, including Sky News' Catherine McGregor and my friend, retired General Senator Jim Molan. And few doubt that the potential for the Chinese to take over Taiwan, but I have to say the Taiwanese foreign minister has said that China is actually not equipped to mount an invasion, but it may be capable of doing so by 2025. Now, his rationale was that the hostile terrain of 500,000 potentially strong guerrilla force could inflict debilitating and possibly humiliating defeat along the style of a Vietnam War. But from my perspective, I got to tell you, I think that's wishful thinking. The Chinese army and their communist dictators are as brutal a force as any ever seen. They have the weaponry, they have the personnel, and more importantly, they seem to care nothing for the conventions of combat or for human life. Remember, this is a country that's already committing genocide and enslaving groups of their own people. Laying waste to Taiwan and all their citizens will not trouble their sleep one bit. That said, the real question in my mind is, what will the West do if China does invade? Will we really go to war over an island that once was part of China? Now, let's recall, it was only 7 years ago that Russia invaded the Ukraine and seized back the Crimean Peninsula. Well, the world sat back, and what did they do? Nothing. They did nothing, except they wagged their finger, said some stern words. And even when Russian forces shot down a commercial passenger plane, there were only diplomatic repercussions. And then have a look around the Western world today, the Western Alliance. It's easy to understand why China fancies its chances. New Zealand are bought and paid for by the Chinese. Canada, well, it's run by a woke tosser who seems to loathe Western civilization. The UK is a great ally, but it's not nearly powerful enough. And Australia, well, we're a great ally too, and we have some of the finest troops in the world, but we're woefully incapable of defending ourselves, let alone defending another country. And that leaves the war-weary United States, led by a dementia-ridden POTUS whose family has grown rich on Chinese appeasement. The only reason the Chinese are posturing up against Taiwan at this point is because they know that they've got Biden's measure. And heck, even a US General Milley, offered to tip the Chinese off if Donald Trump decided to do something in the final days of his presidency. Well, that suggests to me the Chinese have powerful friends throughout the US government, and I don't mean just within the Biden family. Beijing know that with Biden as Commander-in-Chief, they have an opportunity to seize Taiwan like Russia did the Crimean Peninsula. Preventing that from happening will depend on how seriously China takes the jawboning of the USA and their allies. And in the event that China did take Taiwan with little recourse, well, that would have profound implications for our own security and safety. All right, to discuss this, I've invited Michael Shoebridge. He's the director of the Australia's Strategic Policy Institute's Defence Strategy and National Security Program to join me because he's an expert. Michael, thank you for your time tonight. How do you think this China-Taiwan situation is actually going to pan out?
Well, Cory, I'm a bit more optimistic than you, and that's because I look at a few years before now and the path that China was on with intimidating and isolating Taiwan, and I contrast that with now. So right now, there are 6 of the world's navies exercising together up off the coast of Japan with a signal to Beijing about deterring them from doing something stupid around Taiwan. There are 4 French senators in Taiwan right now at the same time as our former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. And there are even prospects of Australia negotiating a trade agreement with Taiwan. And we just heard about US military training of the Taiwanese military that's been quietly going on for years. So the deterrent message to Beijing is getting stronger, and that's a much better path than when Beijing's increasing coercion and isolation of Taiwan was being left largely unopposed.
Yeah, Michael, why do you think it's taken so long then for the Western alliances, I've referred to them, to actually posture up against China by recognising Taiwan? The French, as you said, have got their senators there. Tony Abbott has gone there as a former Prime Minister. Our representatives have been going there. I should say our parliamentary representatives have been going there in an unofficial capacity for quite a long time. But we've never recognised them diplomatically for fear of offending the Chinese. What's changed?
Well, I think what's changed is China has changed, but a whole bunch of leaders and former leaders across the world have been slow to notice or don't seem to be able to notice. Tony Abbott's unusual, really, in being able to be honest about how things have changed from when he was Prime Minister, which was right when we ended the free trade agreement, if you remember. Other Prime Ministers seem more interested in working out their personal angst about no longer being Prime Minister. So recognising how China's changed is what's causing this shift. And you can see that despite all the troubles in America, there's strong congressional support to supporting Taiwan's status and opposing use of force by China against Taiwan.
Yeah. Okay, if we dig back into the history album, Russia made a reasonable case of saying the Crimean Peninsula, should belong to them. The people there speak Russian. Do the Chinese have a legitimate claim to Taiwan, apart from, the nationalist forces, I think it was, fled there during the wars during the 50s? Is there a legitimate claim that's recognised by anyone for a single China, including Taiwan?
No, there's a very different actual China policy and one China policy that countries like Australia have to the one that Beijing likes to tell us we have. So, it was Gough Whitlam back in 1972 who recognised the People's Republic of China. And at the time that Australia recognised the People's Republic of China as the government of China, we only acknowledged that the PRC's view that Taiwan was a province of China. We never accepted that view, and we never have. And we're in very good company internationally. The US, for example, has exactly the same policy. So we've got to, as you say, remember history and not tell ourselves stories about what that history is. And supporting a 24 million person vibrant island democracy in the Indo-Pacific makes a lot of sense coming from Australia, another vibrant island democracy in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because if Taiwan happens to go back into China with or without a military conflict, that would have profound implications for us as the largest nation in the Pacific region, really, or island nation. What would some of the concerns be if China were emboldened by seizing Taiwan?
Well, I think that's why opposing China's intimidation of Taiwan and reversing its isolation, both with military exercises like the one I mentioned, multinational, and with the political support that you see from Tony Abbott and the 4 French senators matters. But let's suppose for a moment Xi was dumb enough to act to seize Taiwan by force, and we were all dumb enough to let that happen. Well, if he achieved it and didn't escalate into a wider war, then he'd have this enormous piece of real estate to project military power from, and he'd own a great chunk of the world's semiconductor industry that he simply doesn't have now, as well as killing a really vibrant democracy that we should be supporting and promoting.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you, Michael Shoebridge. We do have to support democratic ideals and free enterprise right around the world, and we cannot let the bullies win. But I'm going to bow down to your wiser judgment and the hope that we are going to deter them from doing anything. I really hope that is the case. And I can say, Michael Shoebridge, you are right. Thanks so much for your time and joining me on Bernardi tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Cory.